I went back to February 2022 to revisit one of the most iconic Game Nights episodes ever. And not only is this the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, which is a beloved set, we also get to see Post Malone pilot a brand new commander, Chishiro the Shattered Blade. And at the time, I was still an inexperienced deck builder, so I actually used Posty's list to sort of craft and build my own version of Chishiro. But as we'll see, this may not be the most optimized list despite the roughly $6,000 price tag. Let's see what Posty had to say about his deck build.
The commander I'm playing today is Chishiro, the Shattered Blade.
Surrender to my sword.
This samurai snake is all about modifications. So my deck is full of awesome auras, powerful equipment, and hopefully I get to put 1/1 counters on all my stuff. My plan is to assemble an army, suit them up for battle, then stampede over my opponents in true glorious fashion.
Pretty simple, auras, equipments, and then swing. That's more or less the gist of it, but as we'll see with many of our deck building decisions, I think that there are plenty of areas that can be improved upon. And we'll go over these in detail, but in terms of the Game Nights episode itself, Post Malone was able to get out ramp as early as turn 2, and well, let's just watch.
Is it Mana Vault?
No. It's really nothing. I will play a forest.
Okay.
I'm gonna tap 2, and then I'll play an arcane signet.
Nice.
A pretty one.
Oh, that was a
Very
pretty
nice
one.
one.
Thanks, guys.
That'll trigger my Asper Sentinel.
You may be wondering why I highlighted such an uneventful turn, and the answer is actually quite simple. Turn 1 and turn 2 ramp is going to be critical to ensuring that we get out our commander as soon as possible. And Posty understood the mission. Just take a look at this snippet from his deck list. There are 12 total sources of ramp that qualify as 2 or under, but unless you want to proxy your deck, you'll be stuck paying the nearly $600 price tag that comes along with kitting out this full ramp package. So we're going to make to look some improvements in this department. But how about we start with some cuts before we jump into that, and we're going to start with the most expensive section of his deck. Lands are the real culprit here and are the reason the deck list is so expensive. And I do love some of the utility lands such as Yavimaya Hollow and Buried Ruin. Both of them produce colored mana. And not only that, we're not going to be able to really harness the full utility of both of these cards. And in addition to that, Yavimaya Hollow is just very expensive. So for that reason, both of these cards are out. And likewise, we don't really need the expensive cards like Gaia's Cradle, Mishra's Workshop, or even an Ancient Tomb. Now, these are overcosted to an extreme, especially the first two, and if we aren't including these, then we really don't need a Deserted Temple either, which was ultimately pretty lackluster in the list to begin with. There is no direct way for us to tutor out a non-basic land in this deck, and for that reason, a lot of times these will just get stuck and we're not going to be able to actually get the full utility. We're going to save ourselves $3,800 just by cutting these 6 lands. And I get it, Post Malone really doesn't have to worry about the price, but for the average person, it's going to be exclusionary. So for that reason, we're going to cut those, and we're not only going to save money, but we're also going to improve the overall function of the deck by adding more colored mana source producers. And for similar reasons, we're going to cut just a couple more lands. We're going to cut the True Dual land, which is the Taiga, Gemstone Cavern, and also Cavern of Souls, saving us another roughly $400. And we won't just be replacing these lands, we're actually going to be adding some, as Austin's initial list only has 32 lands in total. And I think that for this deck build, especially because we're going to be removing some of the fast mana elements, we're going to have to at least get to 35 total lands for the overall structure and function of this deck. Now, in order to make the final cuts for the lands in the deck, I did end up cutting a Grim Monolith and also a Mana Vault for budgetary reasons. They're pretty obvious, but I think that we need to talk about a problem child for this deck, and that is Doubling Season. So if you're running something like a Super Friends strategy, then sure, include Doubling Season in all of your decks, but we're in a Gruul modified creatures strategy. Really, we do get to reap the benefit of +1/+1 counters, and we also get to double up on our spirits. But unfortunately, we have a lot of equipment strategy in this deck, and it has no direct benefit with Doubling Season. And if Chishiro gets removed, those cards with 1/1 counters on them no longer double at our end step, basically leaving this card dead in the water without our commander. By my count, Posty's list included only 6 other cards that actually make 1/1 counters. That's right, 6. And that's before my cuts to the deck. That means that the Doubling Season in place now is primarily there for the commander, and a 5-mana enchantment that otherwise does nothing in our deck without our commander is something I absolutely do not want. And to be fair, as we look to deconstruct this deck and remake it, I would certainly go with a heavier 1/1 counter theme, but I want to be more in the spirit of Game Nights and will ultimately have a more mixed build. So here is a deck list updated after those cuts with a total of 35 lands. But let's get back to the game. A little VO for this section. I want to highlight this term because it points to something special about Chishiro. We get to capitalize on cards like Kenrith's Transformation, which will be used on our opponent's creatures to remove them. But as explained by Post Malone,
and even though I targeted your creature, that is an aura I control.
Oh.
So my commander will trigger, and I will make a 2/2 spirit token with Manache.
Ooh. Holy Spirit, activate.
And I will draw a card of Kenrith's Transformation.
you can see how aura-based removal will solve two issues in one: synergy with our commander, and also removal for our opponent's threats. These are some of the best cards in our deck, so we will certainly be including these. Next, let's talk about an infinite combo that isn't really serving the purposes of our deck list. Godo, Bandit Warlord, and Helm of the Host is a notorious infinite combo whereupon you play Godo, tutor out the Helm of the Host to the battlefield, equip the Helm to Godo, and then go to combat, making a hasted copy, and then you effectively have infinite combat steps for infinite damage. But here's why I don't really like this combo. Just because Godo tutors out the Helm doesn't mean that we have a reliable way to actually cheat that very expensive equip cost of the Helm. So effectively, it's an 11 mana combo, and 11 mana combos tend to be not so good in my opinion. And the problems continue, as Chishiro really cares about building a board and adding counters to it to incrementally overcome our opponents. The Godo combo doesn't necessarily offer anything to this or our overall game plan. I think in a strictly competitive build, you can certainly put in the Godo Helm combo, but we're not playing competitive, and I don't think Chishiro is ever realistically going to be a competitive commander. Long story short, we're just going to cut both of these cards. But let's see exactly how this turned out for Posty.
Uh-oh.
When it enters the battlefield, I will search my library for an equipment.
Yowza.
This could be ballgame.
Oh, please don't end the game right now, Posty. Please, 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 please don't end the game.
And I will find a Caldra Complete.
Interesting.
When it enters the battlefield, it will create a germ token and equip itself to that germ. I am complete.
Okay, this isn't what I was expecting. I mean, this card is still incredibly powerful, but I thought he was just gonna get an infinite combo.
I know everybody at home is like, just go get Helm. It's in my hand. I wish it wasn't in my hand, but it is in my hand. But if I get another turn and everything goes the way that I am hoping that it goes, I'm gonna win next turn.
Another pet peeve of mine is having cards included simply because they are good. There's no thought about synergy, there's no thought about how they may interact with our deck. It simply becomes card good, therefore I will include. And the main culprits in this deck are Ragavan, Dockside Extortionist, and also Craterhoof Behemoth. And to Posty's credit, there are two tutors in order to get the hoof out onto the battlefield, namely with Green Sun Zenith and also Pattern of Rebirth. But the problem with Pattern of Rebirth is that the creature has to actually die in order for us to get the tutor off in the first place. And I don't know if you checked, but we don't have a sack outlet in our deck, meaning we have to rely on our opponents to actually kill the creature in order to tutor out the Craterhoof. And it also has to be before our combat in order to attack and get the benefit of the Craterhoof, which will certainly be telegraphed, meaning that effectively we really only have one tutor, which is Green Sun Zenith. And to be fair, I would be less critical of this build path if there were more or better ways to tutor out these creatures, but I don't like Craterhoof in the first place, and for that reason, I'm actually going to be cutting it from the deck list. Likewise, Dockside and Ragavan are extremely good, so certainly include those if that suits you, but I don't want to shell out another $120 for two cards when I can actually replace them with more synergistic pieces that cost way less and assist with our board. Cards like Rishkar Pima Renegade, or even just like a Fertilith. Our card cost basis would then go from $120 for two cards all the way down to 20 cents. Before we get into cutting more expensive cards, I want to draw your attention to a few enchantments that I don't think make the most sense. Let's start with Jugen Defends the Temple. Now don't get me wrong, this does give us a body and then counters, but we have to wait in between turns for this to trigger, and in my various tests with the deck, I found that this card underperformed time and time again. I would have been much happier with a cheaper enchantment that synergizes with our deck, such as an Ordeal of Nylea, which ultimately I did include. Next is Crown in Flames. Now this card does function as a mana sink, but also as another combo piece. This card plus Chishiro plus a sack outlet equals infinite enter the battlefield triggers. And this is because the cost of playing Crown in Flames plus the activated ability equals 2 red mana. And if we have a token doubler out with Chishiro, we make 2 spirits, followed by sacrificing both to, let's say, a Phyrexian Altar to generate 2 red, which allows us to then return it to hand and then replay it. Now, if we have something that cares about casting spells or ETB effects, this allows us to go infinite. Unfortunately, this is a 3-card combo at best and a relatively poor mana sink. And yes, I do understand that we can use this card to make 2/2 spirits with Chishiro repeatedly, but upon testing the deck, you'll quickly find this rarely occurs in actual play because you're using your mana for other reasons, and it's much easier to get more green than red mana en masse. Finally, Ancestral Mask was in Posty's list, and this card is a stud of a finisher in Enchantress decks when we have 10 to 20 enchantments dumped onto our board, but in this deck we have exactly 10 total enchantments, including the Mask. The likelihood that we hit exactly these and the Mask is pretty low. And yes, I know it counts your opponent's enchantments, but I think we should look to improve on this because there are many games where there won't be dozens of enchantments out, and this will mostly just be a dud of a card. The next issue that I want to tackle is our ramp package. Artifact ramp is really not the safest anymore, with various sweepers running around that deal with artifacts and creatures in an equal amount of effectiveness, and as such, I would rather have us err on the side of benefiting off of synergy with our commander and have more creature-based ramp, which is why cards like Incubation Druid, Sakura Tribe Elder, and also Orochi Merge Keeper have synergy with our deck and also fit the 2-mana ramp slot, meaning that we get to play our commander the very next turn. But enchantment-based ramps should not be excluded either, because in the event that we draw it later in the game, we can at least play it and generate some value off of our commander's other ability, which is why I've included cards like Wild Growth and Fertile Ground. And this is a small optimization, but I think over the course of many games, you'll notice that it actually has more benefit than strictly artifact-based ramp. Now, there were a few cards I was actually very surprised to not see in Post Malone's final Chishiro deck list, namely Forgotten Ancient, Taurian Mauler, and also Champion of Lambhole. Now, all of these tend to overperform, for me personally, but also in the various games that I've seen them played in. In a recent Commander at Home episode, as you can see, Brian Kibler managed to get his Forgotten Ancient up to some just insane numbers, and it really lives up to its name. It just tends to get forgotten about. Likewise, the Champion has caused me to lose numerous different games in person just because it sort of sneaks up on you. All of a sudden you realize that you can't block against it and then you're dead. And the best part about that is you can't really feel bad about it because this card is staring you right in the face on the table the entire time. But now it's my turn to include some expensive cards now that I've cut roughly $4,000 worth of cards out of Post Malone's initial list. And let's start with an all-star of equipment, Commander's Plate. Commander's Plate is great because it's going to be 1 mana to cast, which is relatively low to the ground, triggering our commander for cheap, but also once equipped, it gives us protection to white, blue, and black, which are the heaviest removal colors available. And this card has really overperformed for me time and time again. I would encourage you to give it a try in your Chishiro list. Next, since I'm feeling extra rich today apparently, is the Great Henge. And this card really does it all for us. And I mean, it does it all in pretty much every deck that the Great Henge is in, but seriously, it gives us +1/+1 counters, it ramps us, it draws us cards, and the incidental life gain is not so shabby either. Now, I want to talk about card draw. As I went through my various games, I found that the card draw was a little bit lackluster, and sometimes my hand would just sputter out, and that's why Posty included various wheel effects in his deck. Now, I'm interested in bringing the total cost of the deck down, hence removing Wheel of Fortune, but we need cards that can repopulate our hand. And as you can see in our final list, I added a bunch of different effects. 17 total cards that draw us, and if you include cards like Itali, which supply card advantage, it brings us up even higher. Some of my favorite includes Artoski, Rishkar's Expertise, and Greater Good, which also doubles as a sack outlet. And on a slightly different note, I want to point out that I would have loved to include cards like Biophagus, Defiler of Vigor, Benevolent Hydra, Anduril, Narsil Reforged, Ozolus Shattered Spire, Sword of Fortune Frontier. I mean, the list goes on. But unfortunately, we are building a deck that is period appropriate. We're building a deck that Post Malone could have built, not some newfangled mock-up. And this is the final list. I think that you'll find this offers you a much more consistent gameplay experience without breaking the bank. And our total saved on the average deck price was $5,111, which is just crazy to say out loud. And yes, a lot of that was wrapped up in the mana base, but still, that is a massive price difference. You do not have to pay an arm and a leg to make a deck that serves you well. I hope that this video and also the subsequent deck list that was built really helps to encapsulate the spirit of what Post Malone was going for in his deck list. Chishiro is really a badass, and with a nickname like the Shattered Blade, I hope that I could do some justice to this very cool commander. Now, I have personally played through various iterations of this commander's deck lists, and I can say that this current build that I've supplied for you today is actually quite similar to one of my previous decks that I have played. And I think if you give it a chance, you might just like it. And unfortunately for Austin, he met his demise at the hands of Lady Danger, who was piloting Ishin, another crazy strong commander from Kamigawa. But as we watch the end of the game, you can't help but think if certain cards were swapped out, Posty easily could have run away with this game. Maybe if he had more draw, or cards that didn't require such massive mana investments, or more aura-based ramp to build his board. I realize now I'm just talking about my deck. Well, since we're on that topic, you can check out the updated list in the description below. Likewise, I will also link Post Malone's list so you can see where we started out. All credit goes to the Command Zone and Game Nights for making this amazing material that I can pick up from and enjoy. Check out their channel, link down in the description below. If you made it to the end of the video, you rock. Seriously, thank you for watching the video all the way through. It really helps out with the algorithm pushing this to more people to watch it, and I truly hope that the video was worth your time. And if you want to continue to support what I do with this channel, the best way is to subscribe. Your subscription goes a very long way to ensure the future health and performance of the channel. It also means you get access to my videos as soon as they go live and access to my custom deck lists as soon as possible. Support my addiction so I can continue supporting your addiction. I've been Kyle, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.